Hello and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I am still chatting with Emma, and this is the second and final part of her pregnancies and birth stories. And in this episode, we are talking all about the birth of her daughter Daisy. Emma takes us through falling pregnant with her daughter 6 years after having her son. And this time around, she reflected back on her first pregnancy and birth, and she wanted to do things differently. So she researched, she informed herself, and in doing that, she realized that the best option for her was to have a free birth. Emma takes us through her journey of informing herself and arming herself with as much information and evidence as she could to prepare for a free birth, as well as the stigma she experienced when people around her would ask her about her birthing options, and she would simply respond that she was going to have a free birth. She also takes us through not just the evidence-based preparation she did and the birthing preparation she did, but also how she spiritually and emotionally prepared for the birth of her daughter and fully accepted responsibility for whichever way the birth was going to unfold. And finally, Emma takes us through her second postpartum and how she wanted to do things differently, again after reflecting on her first postpartum, and how this time around she gave herself permission to take it a lot more slow and really enjoy the newborn bubble. I will leave you with Emma's episode now, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. You are listening to Cuppa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mum or mum-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and parenting. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, relax, and enjoy this episode. And so tell us now about having a 6-year age gap. So did you think you were done after Charlie, or was it intentional to have a long age gap?
I guess obviously I was quite young, I hadn't really established my career. I kind of, had baby, and then 6 months later I had to start thinking about, okay, well, I've got to start resuming work and starting to get back into my career. So I did that, and that was kind of my focus. And, I was lucky that I was able to do it gradually and did only a couple of days a week and did part-time for quite a few years. And then as I started, Charlie started to get older, and then I started to get busier with work and started to add a few more days and, built it up to working full time. We kind of got to that point, obviously financially, we were a bit more secure and that sort of thing as well. So I was like, well, I guess it was about when Charlie turned 5. And I think he actually mentioned, he's like, Mum, how come I don't have a brother or a sister? And I was like, oh, that's a really great question, bud. Like, do you want a brother or a sister? Like, because I always thought I didn't know how he would cope. He was kind of a very needy, attentive kind of child. So I was like, oh, I don't know whether, maybe you would be better off as a single child or only child, or I guess we hadn't ruled it out, but I guess I just knew that I had so much time up my sleeve that if it was going to happen, or if we decided to, that there could potentially be more children. And I think I did want to have more children, but I just sort of wanted to try and wait till I was ready as such. And then so Charlie literally sort of started that, and then that got Jake and I talking about, like, okay, we're in this position now, how do we feel about trying for a second? And we're both kind of like, actually, like, I think this is something that we can do and we want, so let's give it a go. And me being me and knowing how quickly I fell pregnant with Charlie, it was literally a one-hit kind of wonder. It was like, okay, I'm so fertile, like, we'll just start and I'm sure I'll fall pregnant straight away. But that wasn't the case. We started trying, and it ended up being a year-long journey to even conceive Daisy. So that was, hey, it had its kind of lessons and things as well, and just goes to show you that you can't control life or when a child decides that it's ready to come through. And it was a really interesting time. Yeah.
So how did you feel for that whole year? Were you starting to, I guess, question your fertility and go, do I have a problem? Or maybe not.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should rephrase that, because I shouldn't just say, did you have a problem? I should say, could there be a problem in amongst the two people trying to conceive? Because obviously the men factor is also a thing. Because, as you said, it worked straight away the first time. But I mean, fertility changes. Obviously, we know that for both men and female. So were you starting to kind of go, oh, do I need to investigate this?
Yeah, definitely. So we were kind of at that point, like I'd started to do a little bit of acupuncture to help try and regulate my cycle, because straight away I was like, oh, maybe it's my cycle. My cycle's been a bit longer than what it normally had, blah, blah, blah. I'll start to do that. And then it did get to that point though, and I was like, you know what, maybe it's not me. I'm doing all the things. I'm like, maybe it's you, Jake. So I remember being like, I was speaking to my acupuncturist about it, and she was like, why don't you get Jake to come in and we'll have a look and we'll do some work on him, because we actually do work with male fertility. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Okay. So funny story with that. We'd literally booked him in, but we couldn't get in for, I think, about a month with this lady, because there was only one lady in that practice that specialized in the male fertility. So it was a bit of a wait list. So we put him on for that. And then literally the week before, we found out that I fell pregnant. So it was kind of like this. Yeah. So I remember him calling the practice up being like, so I don't actually need this appointment now because Emma's pregnant. So I guess that's a good thing.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah. So but no, it was definitely a really interesting period for that year, because I like to think of myself as quite health conscious. I was trying to do what I thought, all the right things to try and consciously kind of conceive. So you do kind of get to that point where it was, had it have not happened like right when it did, that we probably would have looked to go into like seeing the GP and been like, do we need to look at fertility testing and go down that sort of pathway.
So you got pregnant, and so what was that like after finally a year you're pregnant? Are you both ecstatic at that point?
Okay, well, I should also mention, so in between, so just before, 3 months before we actually fell pregnant, we did have a positive pregnancy test, which then ended up into a miscarriage. So that was kind of a real kick in the guts. Like I kind of did take a bit of a positive thing out of it. It was like, okay, well, obviously we are fertile, like, it can happen. It, we did get that positive test. And so I think we were only maybe 7 weeks when the miscarriage happened. So, it was early, and I guess part of me was kind of like, well, I wish I didn't know that I had miscarriage, and, wish I didn't sort of take that test and whatever else. So, there was, that kind of was another big emotional kind of wave that went through, but I was just trying to sort of stay positive. Like, I did have this deep knowing. I was like, I knew that eventually it would happen. And then, so when it did happen, so when we did find out with Daisy, I couldn't really get excited about it, given that until I sort of knew that we were quite a way in, it was really hard for me to get attached. So, it was this really interesting time period where I was kind of like excited, but then I didn't want to get too attached, because I was like, well, what happens if it's not meant to be and we lose it again? Or, like just to go through that emotionally, I think would have been, really tough. And so it was hard to kind of get excited. And that was, an interesting start to the pregnancy, and I'd not really been prepared for that, I guess. It was an interesting time.
And I think, as you said, when you had Charlie, you didn't have a miscarriage before him, or not that no. So therefore you don't, I mean, I'm not sure if that even crossed your mind at any point during Charlie's pregnancy, but usually when you haven't had a miscarriage, you just go, well, I'm pregnant, things will unravel. After you've had a miscarriage, it just completely changes the way you see pregnancy, because it all of a sudden it's this, not this thing, but it's so precious, and you could lose it at any point. And we know that miscarriages are super common, that, it's 1 in 4 women. It's absolutely devastating when you have one, regardless of whether it's at 5 weeks or you have a second or even third trimester infant loss. It's devastating all the same. Like when you have your positive pregnancy, and just like you've been waiting 9 months, it's positive you're pregnant, and then you're not. it's a loss all the same. And then the subsequent pregnancy is usually really it's as you said, it's really hard to get attached, and you just go, it could end at any point, really. Like it's it's so precious, but yet it's so fragile, I guess.
And I guess that's what we do as humans. We try and protect ourselves, and you don't want to get too attached, because if you are to lose it, then you want to kind of prepare yourself. Like, it's weird, us humans go through this weird way in which we kind of try to emotionally process things. But now obviously I've got Daisy, and seeing how that kind of really helped us with our journey, and even trusting myself, and coming into parenthood again the second time, like, I'm kind of actually grateful that I did have that experience, because it kind of like you say, it really made me so grateful of that, like how sacred birth is, and that at any moment, like, you can lose it, and it is such a fragile thing, but that's the beauty of it too. I think having had that actually really kind of made me so much more just like grateful. And even though I kind of found it hard to kind of get excited and get attached, like, obviously once you start to actually see your growing bump, and things are progressing, you can kind of relax a little bit more. But it kind of was really part of the journey, so it's not it wasn't necessarily like the worst thing in the world, and obviously everything happens for a reason. Well, that's my belief anyway. But so I think that kind of really helped with everything, when we're leading into Daisy's birth, and trusting my body, and I'm a deeply spiritual person as well, and trusting that that soul wasn't ready, and this soul could be the one that's going to come through, or it might not, and just coming back to those deep spiritual practices too. Like, that was such a big time of spiritual growth for me as well. So
this time around, you're obviously a lot more informed, because you've had Charlie. What birthing option did you want to go to? So at that point, I believe you're on the Sunshine Coast now. How was that conversation?
So basically, we'd come out of this sort of COVID period, and I knew that I just couldn't see myself birthing in a hospital at all, because everything was kind of shifting and changing. Birth partners were allowed at some point, and then you weren't allowed to support people one day, and then the next week you might have been, and then you had to be vaccinated, or you didn't have to be vaccinated, and there was all, like, it was just very a tumultuous time. And I guess this time around, bringing a child in, like, you need that stability, and for me, I just felt that the hospital system wasn't going to be the place for us. So immediately I knew, okay, it wasn't going to be in a hospital, and I was like, so that only really leaves home birth or free birth. And I remember speaking to Jake about it, and he was like, he was always going to support me no matter what, and what I felt comfortable and wanted to choose. And I sort of looked into getting a home birthing midwife, and then turns out they're quite expensive. So it kind of almost puts you in this box. Like, if you don't birth within that birthing system, you're then going to have to fork out, I think one of my friends told me that her birth cost her nearly upwards of $12,000. And I was like, wow, okay, that's, crazy. And I realized how the midwives, like, obviously were important when I had Charlie, but they really didn't do that much. And I was like, can I really invest $12,000 into this? So I was kind of like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. And then I was kind of, the other thing as well is, I was like, is this just a limiting belief around money? Like, am I not valuing this experience? Do I not think that we're worth it? And I kind of had to do a lot of, questioning and querying around that. Like, was it just the fact that it was the money, or, was it something that I didn't want? And then I sort of did some more research, and I found this free birthing page on Instagram. And I sort of didn't really know what a free birth was until, pretty much when I was early on pregnant. And so I started to look into that, and I was kind of, okay, what does that look like? How is this a thing? Blah, blah, blah. And then the more I kind of like followed this page, and just how confident these women were, where they didn't have, like, they saw birth in the fact that it wasn't a medical, it wasn't a medical event. And I guess, in some cases it can be that way if you're really low risk. And I sort of was like, well, you know what? I had a really low risk pregnancy with Charlie. I'm feeling really good this pregnancy. So I started to kind of like, do the pros and cons. I'm like, okay, do we really want to spend this money on that? Do I really need that? And then I was like, all right, I'll just kind of put it out there in this Facebook group, and was like, can anyone recommend a doula or a midwife, and I'll have a chat. And I got a couple of responses back, and a few different recommended people. And there was one lady who got recommended a couple of times, and she was a doula.
Mm-hmm.
And I clicked onto her website and kind of did a bit of stalking and was like, let's see what this woman's all about. And I found out that she'd free birthed, so she had 4 kids, and she'd had a couple of home births with midwives and then free birthed her last 2. And I was like, oh, so I was reading her birth story. She had it all on her website, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, you know, she did that and she supported herself and whatever else. I was like, oh, maybe, you know, I'll meet with her and we'll have a chat and see if that's going to be a fit for us. And so, yeah, from that, we met up, we had a chat, and I was kind of like, okay, I feel really confident with this lady. Like, I really align with her. She kind of, you know, now I kind of was a bit more clear with how I wanted my birth to look and, you know, how little intervention I wanted and things like that. She was like, yeah, I'm happy to support you through that. Like, that would be fine. I was like, amazing. So we're doing this. And then it was really interesting though. So I, you know, we found the doula. I was kind of in this point of like people asking like, oh, so what hospital are you having a baby at? Or what? And I'm like, oh, I'm actually going to have a home birth. And they're like, okay, so what does that look like? Because people are quite, I didn't think that home birth in itself was still quite a, not taboo, but not a expected place that women would go to birth. And I didn't realize how kind of uncommon that may have been. And so I was like, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this is how it's going to be. And then they were like, okay, so does like a midwife come? And I was like, oh, well, actually, I'm going to free birth. And they're like, oh, what's that? And I'm like, well, there's going to be no medical professionals. And then they'd be like, oh my God, that's reckless, blah, blah, blah. And like, we'd just go to this whole tangent. And so pretty quick, I soon started to keep my mouth closed and was like, if people asked me, they were like, oh yeah, where are you going? You're having a hospital birth? And I was like, no, I'm having a home birth. And then they say, is a midwife coming? I just say yes. So I just kind of didn't want to, you know, dive into that negative story or, you know, people projecting all those negative things. But what if this happens? And, you know, what if something goes wrong? What if your baby is blah, blah, blah? And I was like, okay, I need to just kind of like not put that into my, you know, awareness. Obviously I was aware of that. And when you go into a free birth, I'd kind of come to that point of like, I'm taking full responsibility for whatever happens with me and baby. This is where I feel most safe. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and we'll work it out along the way if intervention does need to take place or whatever. And so I remember kind of that was the start of where I really was just falling back on this deep trust of myself and my baby. And I was like, you know what, like if it's not meant to be, like I was at that point, like I came to this full, this kind of sounds a bit morbid, but I came to this full point of surrender. I was like, look, if I'm meant to die in childbirth and whatever else, then if that's going to happen, it's going to happen. Like it doesn't matter if I'm in a hospital or I'm at home. I was kind of just like that was kind of where my thinking kind of went. But I guess I kind of had to really zoom out to kind of, you know, with my spiritual practices and things like that, was like, that was the reality of it. Like I was having this radical self-responsibility, I guess. And, you know, whatever that looked like, whether it was, you know, the best possible outcome or the worst possible outcome, I was, you know, pretty well prepared for all of it. And so that's one thing I would, you know, I think you have to be very okay with that radical self-responsibility. And, you know, if something does go wrong, like, are you going to be able to accept that that was your choice? And, you know, are you going to be able to live with those choices? But again, that may or may not happen. We don't know. So that would be one thing I would just preface, you know, if that was something that women or, you know, other women are actually thinking of doing, is you do have to have that radical self-responsibility, and it takes quite a bit of a mental and emotional strength to kind of come to that point. And, you know, people would think that I'm crazy and they're just like, I can't believe you would say that. And I was like, but I have to, like, that's just the headspace I have to go into doing this. Like, this is just kind of where I'm at with my journey. And, you know, I know this isn't going to be for everybody. And, you know, for some people, they wouldn't feel safe in this space. But for me, this is what's feeling safe for me right now. This is where I'm feeling comfortable, and, you know, I'm trusting my body and my baby, and that this is going to work out. Yeah, that was kind of our lead up into choosing to free birth.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I've had another guest on the podcast that decided to free birth and said almost word for word the exact same things you just did. She also said, I accept full responsibility no matter how my birth turns out. You know, it's, and in her case, you know, it was fine. The baby did need transferred to the hospital actually, but you know, it's, as you said, you know, it's not just, oh, I'm gonna have a birth at home and I'm gonna have no medical professional because I don't trust anyone. It's not about that. It's about going, I know my body can birth, and yes, I can go to the hospital, but sometimes it's not the best place because things like intervention, things like induction or epidural are just pushed on women, and sometimes that's not it's not the best place, you know. And it's so interesting when you say, oh, you talk about, you know, your birth, and then people around you, they're like, oh, which hospital? Because that's the norm. The norm is you go to the hospital. If you don't go to the hospital, that's not safe. And it's just not the case. As you said, you know, there is, obviously we're talking about low risk pregnancies, or if we're not talking about that, we're talking about women that are probably very informed. Maybe they've done it before, or maybe, again, they accept full responsibility no matter how it goes. But in the case of free birthing, a lot of the women that, you know, maybe want to or start diving into it, they're very informed. They know what could happen. They usually, as you said, you kind of have to go to the worst case scenario and go, how am I going to feel if this is my reality? How am I going to accept it, and how am I going to live through that as well? It's, you know, I don't know the statistics, but I mean, it's probably usually fine. We know that some women, they have precipitous labors and they just birth at home when they were meant to go to hospital, but it just happened so quickly. They birth at home and they're fine. So we know that the human body is capable of doing that. Again, hospitals have a time, they have a place, and for some women, they would not feel safe doing it at home. And that is totally fine, obviously. And then the hospital is the best place for them. For other women, it's good to explore options and to go, I'm going to inform myself. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to go, oh, yeah, let's just do this and see what happens. No, usually those women that want a home birth or free birth, they're super informed, and they're probably more informed than like the majority of women, really, because you kind of, when you go to hospital and you arrive in labor, you hand over the responsibility of your health and your baby's health to those people. So you don't have to think about it. You can just go, if anything goes wrong, they will call an emergency C-section, they will give me drugs, they will do this, whatever. When you free birth, there's no one to hand that responsibility to. It's you and your partner and the doula potentially. And that's it. So you all have to know what to do, how to react, how quickly to react if it came to that. Otherwise, you just go as per usual. Yeah,
exactly right. And it was really interesting that you say, like, with all the research and things like that, and, you know, actually looking into some statistical data about like home birth and free birth even, and, you know, the outcomes of like hospital births versus home births, like there's still not enough research to support a lot of these things. But from some of the things that I was reading, it's like women were having just more amazing outcomes at home too. Like, obviously there's less risk of that intervention and things happening. But I guess like having had this experiencing this now, it's just like I just am so wanting to empower other women, even if they do decide, like, you know, the hospital system is the safest for them, but how can they equip themselves with the knowledge or the trust that, you know, just because you're in that hospital setting doesn't mean you have to say yes to the intervention, doesn't mean that it has to lead down to this cascade of, you know, whatever it can be. And I've had plenty of examples of that where women have kind of just fully trusted themselves, and, you know, as they're getting pressure to induce and things like that, you know, having healthy babies at 42 or even 43 weeks. And, you know, whereas, you know, the obstetricians are kind of like, no, we've got to intervene, we want to induce, or we want to do Cs, or, you know, whatever it might be. But knowing that, I think women sometimes we don't take that responsibility, and knowing that we still are in control of this. And that's the other thing, I guess, where we can kind of look at, this could obviously go a whole different rant of, you know, how the system is sort of perhaps not the best it could be when it comes to birthing. But, you know, how can you be equipped to navigate that system? And, you know, you've known some of these obstetricians you might have seen, you know, for 5 minutes. How are they to know what you and your body are going to do? Like, you've lived with your body, you've lived with that baby for 9 months. Like, you know better than that. But obviously it's hard to kind of, they've got the medical research and, you know, all the clinical research to go off, and experience and things too. But how are you going to navigate that kind of experience and still be in your power? That's what I'm so passionate about now. And I hope that, you know, any women listening to this can really kind of, you know, go to that inner self-trust. And, you know, even if the doctors or medical professionals are recommending one thing, like, you know, how do you feel about that? Does that feel good for you? Does that feel like, you know, coming back to you? And at the end of the day, it's always how you feel. And, you know, you'll know if things, well, 9 times out of 10, you know if something's wrong with you and baby, or, you know, if you're not feeling those inklings that anything is wrong or you don't need that intervention, then, you know, be firm with that. That's the other thing that I really want to kind of, as I'm sharing this story, to really, you know, get that out.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I feel like I say it every single episode, but you can say no to anything, to any test, blood test, scan, intervention, anything, because they can't force it upon you. They need consent at all times. They always need consent. Consent is you saying yes. And the other thing about consent as well that I love to say is consent can be withdrawn at any point without any reason, without any because, without any yes, but I signed this. No, consent can be withdrawn. You can say, actually, I've changed my mind. I don't want to do it. Don't touch me. Don't do it. It's not happening. That is fine. And that's the other thing with the hospital. It's got a time and a place, but sometimes you have to stand your ground, and it's hard when you're a first-time mom, or you're in labor, or you just don't know what you don't know. But as you said, if it doesn't feel right, just say no, or just say, what other option do I have? Can I have more time? Sometimes it seems silly to say, can I have more time to birth or to push? But sometimes that gets the midwives or the obstetrician off your back, and at least you can kind of go, okay, they gave me some time generously, but sometimes that's all it takes. Just, you know, if it doesn't feel right, don't agree to it. Say, I need to think about it. No. Or can I have more time? What other options do I have? Because you are entitled to the birth you want, unless obviously if there is an emergency, if there is a medical problem, that's another thing, obviously. But if things 100%. Are looking fine for mom, for baby, there is no sense of emergency. Sometimes obstetrician midwives can put a bit of pressure because maybe it's fitting their schedule, for example. That's not a reason. That's not a reason to you know, push faster or do an episiotomy. That's just not a reason for it. So if it feels like that's what's happening, no, the answer is no. And that's really hard. And that's where that also needs to be a conversation with the birth partner, because they probably might be the one saying, no, my wife is not having that. Because when you're obviously in that space of labor, like I know with my labors, like you kind of just become so internalized with what's going on that you can't make a choice, or like you're not sound of mind. Like, you know, people would probably have agreed to something that, you know, when they're actually sound of mind, they're like, why did I say yes to that? Like I was just in this consumed by what was going on that I didn't have the time, or I wasn't at capacity to make that decision. So 100%, either your birth partner or like having a doula, like that is 100% needed for every woman to help advocate for them. Yeah, that's it. And regardless of how strong you think you might be. Yeah, exactly. Because as you said, once you're in labor, like honestly, you've got other things to do than to think about, do I want this intervention right now? You're like, no, you're not thinking about that, which is why having those conversation in terms of birth preferences and saying, I don't want this unless you know, it is an absolute emergency, or unless this happens, or you know, there might be exemptions, obviously, but otherwise just say, look, I don't think I want that, so just say no for me, or just say that's not the preference, or you know, which can be really hard too. It's hard because birth can unfold in so many different ways, so it's kind of hard to try and think of the potential scenarios, I guess, and go, well, in every scenario it's no unless this.
Yeah, exactly. And that it's just different. And obviously from every birth, you know, you can have your first child and your pregnancy and birth can be completely different to the second, which is what I found out as well. Like, you know, you kind of want to go into this comparison like, oh, this happened with this pregnancy and birth and this is going to unfold this way, but it's not the case. Well, for some people it may be, but 9 times out of 10, it's, you know, 2 different babies. And
so how did you educate yourself? So you had your doula. I'm guessing that was also part of the education, and the maybe not so much education, but prepare, like the preparation that comes into free birthing. I'm guessing it's quite similar to a home birth as well, where you'd have a pool set up and all of that.
Yep. So I was lucky. My doula had the pool available for us to hire and everything like that. So that was kind of all taken care of. She had like checklists of like, what you may need for home birth. So like lots of sheets, the puppy pads and, sterile scissors and, whatever else was on that checklist. So she gave that to us before and was like, these are optional things. These are things that I supply. These are things that you need to supply. And so, that was one element of obviously like the physical, like go kind of day time. But then in terms of education, what I found to be the most helpful was actually watching birth videos. And it kind of, I would just watch other women and be just so inspired by how calm they would be, whether it be like a water birth, a land birth, whatever it would be. I just couldn't stop watching birth videos. And it was so amazing because you got to see how the varying degrees it can be experiencing a birth. And, some women can be in complete ecstasy and bliss, and some women are screaming their babies out, and some women, like can have an orgasmic birth. Like it's just, there's such an array of experiences. And for me, I just found it so empowering. Like I'm the type of person, like if they can do it, why can't I? So a lot of, I guess that kind of early on was kind of like, okay, well, if they can have that really blissful birth, then that's what I'm going to aspire to have. That's what I'm kind of, envisioning and imagining. So that was one element of that kind of education, if you could call that education. Wouldn't, actually say that
it is a form of education. Honestly, it's like sometimes education isn't just, obviously we come from university background, so education's like it's textbooks, it's journal articles, but no, education when it comes to things like birthing, pregnancy is it can be podcast, it can be books, it can be testimonies, it can be birth videos. Like that is literally what a birth can look like. It doesn't get any more raw and real. And that obviously your podcast is also great, but you don't have the image it comes with. And sometimes in the description you kind of skip through some steps. In birth videos sometimes you've got the whole thing and you can see everything that happens, and you're like, okay, yes, it is sometimes a little bit animal like, and that's how it is. We're mammals,
and that's actually how my birth unfolded with Daisy. It was very mammal like in the end, but we'll get to that. And then in terms of any other education, so I read journal articles and peer reviewed information, and we educated ourselves like on how to do CPR, if bub comes out unresponsive, what do we need to do? So I educated myself around all of those kinds of, practical and physical kind of things with that. And then, looking up best birthing positions, and again, reading the research around that, birth pool versus land birth, all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty thorough, and,
sounds like
I
it.
I didn't expect myself, at late before bed, reading medical articles about like interventions, and then I remember reading stuff like that an obstetrician had written this paper, and, they're talking about outcomes versus CPR versus like if you cut the cord, if you don't cut the cord, like went fully into it. Like I went to the ninth degree, really. So I was quite well armed with, possible A, B, C, D, E, F outcomes. So
Z. Cool.
Yep. Pretty much went through the whole motions of that. So that was, I guess that's the type of person that I am. I like to find the nitty gritty and everything and research everything.
And as I said before, free birthing women, they will be super informed because they have to be, because the responsibility is on them. So they just go, okay, I have to have the information. Did you do any so you read the research, did you do any actual child and baby first aid CPR?
No, as bad as this is, I did watch a lot of like videos on like YouTube and things like that. So I didn't have a formal training, but obviously with our profession, I'd done my, every yearly CPR things, and they do children and baby CPR and that as well. So I kind of had that to fall back on, and, obviously a little newborn infant is quite different again, but, even looking at, okay, like, with resus, like, do you need to do a breath? Do you need to clear out? Do you need to suck? All that sort of stuff. So I guess I didn't really know of I haven't done like a formal infant or baby CPR or child CPR thing. So I don't know whether they go into, that kind of detail as like a newborn. I don't know. So anyways, I kind of just did that myself.
Yeah, no, and as you said, that's right. We do have to do the CPR every year without fail,
Yeah.
and first aid every 3. So, yeah, and they
Yeah.
do mention infants, and I mean, and well, infant and babies actually, which obviously a newborn, if you had to do CPR, would correspond to
Yeah.
a baby. So, yeah,
Yeah.
So you were pretty prepared. It sounds like it.
Yes.
So
yes,
was,
I was.
Jake? I'm guessing as well. Were you sharing that info?
Yeah. So he would kind of be like, why are we, and I was like, you've got to be prepared for everything. So, I'd make him watch videos and, be like, okay, this is how you do CPR on a newborn if you have to do it. And he was like, what? And I was like, well, that's the reality. And he was like, oh, okay, I better start learning. So, no, he was great. But I'd kind of be like, here's the research, learn this is what we need just in case. So, yeah, he was very open and willing to learn all the things too, which was great.
And how did you involve Charlie in the birth? Because obviously he's 6 at the time, so he can obviously comprehend that you're pregnant. There's maybe a sibling coming, and then he can see that you're setting up the house. And are you involving him in that?
Yeah, for sure. So I would have talks with him and be like, look, if you want to be there, you can come and if my plan was to have a water birth, and I was like, if you want to be in the pool with me, you can be there. If you don't want to be there, you don't have to be. Like my mum was going to be there to kind of be there for the birth, and then obviously for Charlie as well. So I was like, look, but I just totally left it like I was like, you've got full autonomy over what you want to choose, if you want to be involved, if you don't want to be. And so the way it kind of worked out was he was next to me on a mat on the floor rolling and pretending he was in labor too. And so I'm in the middle of like full active labor, and Charlie's come in and he's just like rolling around the mat being like, oh, my back, oh yeah, this hurts, oh. And then he was just carrying on because I guess he didn't really understand. We'd kind of prepared him, and he'd actually watch birth videos with me too. So that was kind of cool. And he used to say, like, he'd be like, Mummy, I want to watch you birth the baby, but I don't want to watch that yucky part where the placenta comes out. And I was like, okay, but you don't have to watch that.
Sure.
So so he was kind of in and out the whole time through the actual labor, and then my mum would kind of see that he was sort of like maybe triggering me a little bit because he was kind of putting on a bit of a performance, kind of being like, Mum, I'm over here, give me attention. And so my mum was kind of like, all right, come down, we'll go and watch TV and we'll come back and check later and blah blah blah. So he was in and out the whole time. He didn't see her actually come out, but he was there within like a couple of minutes after.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so now I guess let's rewind a bit. What was the first sign, of Daisy's labor beginning then, and how far along were you?
Yeah, so she was, I guess I kind of had this experience from Charlie that, I literally had him the day before his due date, and, you sometimes get into your head and you think, oh, second baby, sometimes they can come earlier. I'm probably going to go early. So I had it in my head that I was going to go early or right on the due date. And we were lucky enough to be due on the 21st of December, so right close to Christmas. And I was kind of like, right, okay, well, I'm sure we'll have her before. Like, I'll have a baby before Christmas. So that was my headspace going into it. I'm like, I've done this before, it's got to be the same as Charlie. Turns out it wasn't the case. So due date was the 21st of December, and so we kind of got into that Christmas point. Nothing had sort of happened. I was sort of like, okay, well, I guess we'll kind of go to the family things for Christmas, given that I haven't had a baby and we're just kind of in this awkward wait. So by that stage, Christmas had come and gone, and then it was the 27th of December. And we'd just gone to the shops, and then we came home, and I just stood up out of the car, and then my waters broke, and I was like, oh, I think that was my waters broke. I was like, either that or I've peed myself. So I was kind of like, all right, went down from the car and then went to the toilet, kind of checked myself out. I was like, no, okay, that's definitely waters are broken. So I was kind of like, all right, this could be happening. But then I knew that with Charlie, like, things didn't really happen for a few hours after. So I was kind of like, oh, just because this has happened doesn't mean baby's going to come straight away. And then so nothing happened. I called my mum and just let her know, and because it was about 4:00 in the afternoon that had happened, and I was kind of like, oh, I'll probably go into labour that night. So called mum that afternoon, and she was like, okay, well, we'll come over. And then so she stayed the night just in case, we needed her. And then, we made it through the night. Nothing happened. I was kind of like a bit deflated because I was like, by this point, I'm 41 weeks. And I'm kind of just like, oh, I need this baby. Like, I was just kind of at that point of like, I just want this baby to come. I'm done with this pregnancy sort of thing. And so then, waters broke, nothing happens. I wake up the next day and I'm like, okay, well, I'm still kind of like fluids are sort of still slowly leaking. And then this was kind of like a really interesting phase where I was kind of like, okay, well, nothing's happened, and it would been 12 hours. I was like, is this something, like, is something wrong? Like, do I need to go and get intervention? Like, because then I knew that, like, when your waters break, like, there can be risk of infection, you know, if you let it go for too long. And I'm like, okay, so at what point now do I either go get checked, or do I need to, I kind of had all this stuff coming up for me, and I was like, okay, well, we'll just see how it plans out. So I was like, we'll just give it the day and we'll just see what happens. I'm like, surely, you know, labor's imminent and it'll happen. And then, so we were kind of like, you know, got through the day, and it got to like just after lunch in the mid-afternoon. And then I was like, all right, well, I don't know, I'm just a bit bored. Like, we're just kind of waiting around, nothing's happening. So mum was like, all right, well, I need to go get stuff for dinner. And I was like, okay, well, let's go to the shops. So stupidly, I went to the shops as my waters are still kind of slowly leaking. But no contractions, no nothing. So I go to a Woolworths that was close by, and then in the middle of our Woolworths shop, I was like, oh, I think that's a contraction. Oh, that's another contraction. And so we're in the shops, and I was kind of like, I was with like the whole family. Well, it was my mum, Jake, me, and Charlie, and we're all in Woolworths. And I was like, okay, guys, like, wrap this up. Like, I think things are happening, so like, let's get home. So I had, I think, about 3 contractions in Woolworths, and on the Sunshine Coast, like, if anyone's familiar with this area, it was in Nambour, and Nambour's not the nicest place. And I had all these visions of like me giving birth in Woolworths in Nambour, and I was like, oh my God, this can't be happening. Nice. Like, why did I decide to leave the house? Like, why? What is, like, I just went through this whole thing. I was like, I'm not sound of mind. Why did I come out here? Like, I should be at home. Like, this is not okay. And I went through this whole like thing, and I was like, okay, well, let's just get home. So we got home. I didn't really have, like, sitting in the car, I didn't really have any contractions again. And then kind of got home, and I was like, okay, well, you know, I need to kind of, my waters have broken. It's been 24 hours now, and I need to kind of get things to happen, and I want to kind of progress this labor. So I got home and I started like pacing up and down my back stairs, and I was like, this is surely going to drop baby down and like help speed things along. I'm doing these like weird upside down inversions that I thought could be helpful. Turns out it just made me dizzy. It was not ideal. Okay. But at this point I was kind of just like anything to try and help get this baby out. And then so at this point it's like on the 28th it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon by the time I get home. And then start doing all the stairs, and things are starting to progress, and contractions are sort of starting to become a bit more regular, and I'm still just like cruising around, and my mum's like, yeah, so you reckon this is it? And I'm like, yeah, well, you know, I'm talking, I'm breathing. Some of the contractions I'm just having to kind of like still walking up and down the stairs, had to just stop in the middle of the stairs, like just breathe through. And I'm like, yeah, no, I got this, it's cool. So it was basically like that for 2 hours. Like, I'm just still talking and being normal and whatever else. Mum's cooking dinner. And then I remember I was in the lounge room on my exercise ball, just kind of leaning over it for a contraction, just kind of riding that little wave. And, you know, they were very manageable. I was still talking through it until the point, like, Mum had served dinner and she turned the light on because it was starting to get a bit dark at this point. And when she turned that light on, it just like, I instantly was triggered, and I was like, oh my God, I just can't be here anymore. I actually went into this real internal mode. Yeah. And I was like, I've got to go up into my birth space, which was in a room just up from our main house. So I was like, right, go up into the birth space, and I'll just start, you know, going through the motions there. And then things just started to happen really quickly and progress really fast. So I was talking to my doula, like just texting her, just letting her know, like, obviously the day before, like I was like, oh, waters have broken, nothing's happened. So we were in constant communication. And then I remember messaging her after I got home from the shops, being like, okay, you know, had a few contractions at the shops, I'm home now. Things are sort of, you know, sporadic, but still getting pretty regular contractions. And I guess I was probably like, at that point I was fine, and I was probably downplaying where I was kind of at. And then I got to this point and I was like, okay, things just really ramped up, and like active labor was pretty much like on. And I was like, oh my God. And I couldn't, I went into this space of like, I couldn't even pick up my phone to text the doula to like let her know that, okay, come now, like I'm in this point. So I'm like, Jake, call the doula. And he's like, okay, like, you think it's happening? I was like, yes, like, get everything sorted. Like, and we were having a birth photographer as well. And I was like, call her, like, call the people, get the plan started, like, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so he like got my phone and he called. I don't know if he even called her or texted her or what ended up happening, but she was like, okay, yep, I'm on my way. Jake, start filling up the birth pool. So Jake starts filling up the birth pool, and then I'm just in our birth room, and it's just me and Jake. Jake's kind of not really there. I'm just kind of, you know, in my own little thing, just working through each surge and contraction. as he's sort of, trying to get that pool up and running. And then, so by the time the doula got there, I think it was about 8:15. And then the birth photographer pretty much came, about another 15 minutes after that. And so when she gets there, I'm pretty much like stuck on all fours. I'm at the point where like it's getting pretty intense. Contractions are really frequent and consistent. I'm getting not much reprieve in between. She comes and she just jumps in and is amazing and like starts doing some like counter back and pressure support or counter hip pressure, I think they call it. And that's amazing, helping me kind of like get through each of those contractions. And then I got to a point, because things just happened really quick. I remember being like, okay, I'm feeling like things are really intensifying. And then Jake's come over, like he was still I was wondering what he was doing. So turns out we just moved into this place. Like, so I should preface too, we literally just moved in when I was 38 weeks pregnant to our new house. And then I, had the crazy nesting period, and then obviously went over a week overdue. So it was still like this awkward time. And for some reason, the hot water wasn't working where we'd had the birth pool set up. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And Jake was like, okay, so Rosie was there and she was like, right, just start boiling water on the stovetop and start topping it up to try and get it hot. And so I'm wondering kind of like what the go was. And then they told me like, okay, there's no hot water. And I was like, okay, well, what's plan B? Like, get it sorted. Like, I was just like, I need this pool. And then, so he was kind of like, him and mum are kind of running in and out, trying to get that sorted. And then it got to the point where I was like, Jake, just stop. I need you here. Like, he was trying to be with me for each contraction as he was sort of like trying to get, that sorted, because that was kind of his like role, and he took full responsibility. He's like, this is my role. Like, this is my time. Like, I knew he'd had all the pools set up. Like, he knew all the connections. He was like, I've got this. And then when the hot water didn't work, he was like, oh, fuck, this is not working. Like, so it was a bit touch and go there. And then it got to the point where I was like, Jake, just stop. Like, just forget the pool. I just need you. So then my mum had taken full responsibility. And she's like, okay, I'm going to get this pool for you. I know how much you want this pool. So mum's like running in and out, doing that. And then it's probably, I'm going to say, because, timed, like everything just happened really quickly. So it's probably about maybe 8:45. And then I sort of had, obviously with Charlie, I literally threw up and had diarrhea the entire labour. And so I kind of had that in my mind that like that could be a potential thing, and like what am I going to do if that's the case, and how I'm going to stay hydrated, and what anti-nausea things can I have, and I had these homeopathic remedies and all sorts of things. And so I'd been writing everything fine, and then all of a sudden I hit that transition point, and then I threw up. I was like, oh, I'm going to be sick. So I threw up the once, and I was like, oh no, it's coming. Like, and I kind of had it in my mind that this could be like an ongoing thing and I'm not going to be able to stop. But turns out like I did that one kind of vomit, and then I raced to the toilet, and then like, passed everything through. And then things just like really got intense after that. And I was like to Jake, I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm down on all fours. And I was like, can I just get into this pool? Like, I need to get into this pool. And he was like, then Jake and the doula like had checked the temperature, and it was still really quite cool. And they're like, I'm sorry, but the pool's not going to be ready. And I was just like, I just hit this point of like, I just didn't know what to do. I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. This is too intense. Like, I had, no reprieve between contractions now. I try and like, I'm on all fours. I try and lay to my side to kind of get a little bit of reprieve in between, but I just couldn't be on any other position other than all fours. So I was just like rocking that, like real primal. It kind of got to that point, like they were like, the pool's not going to be ready. And I remember I was just so mad and internally raging that I just like let that out as like sacred rage with my like moans and groans and voice through each contraction that I was like screaming. I was just like, I've got to get this out, like, and it kind of really helped me kind of move through labor. And it was kind of like a thing to kind of focus on. I was like, I'm just going to channel all this rage that I'm feeling about not being able to get in the pool. And that's like the one memory that I remember was just like, all I wanted was either a shower or to get in the pool. It just wasn't happening. And I was like, that was just the one thing that was just getting me through. I was like, surely it'll be right. Like it'll all happen. And I was like, I'm just going to rage on through this. And turns out that rage just really brought her on really quick. And then I remember I got to that point where I was like, look Jake in the eyes. And I was like, I can't do it. And he just like looked at me and he was just like, you told me that you were going to say this is going to happen, and this means that you're really close. And he's like, you've got to just draw on the strength of all your sisters and, all the wisdom and all the you know, the energy that surrounds you and just pull on all of that strength. You got this. And he was like just my rock, like, you know, fully supported me. But at the same time, I was like,
That's so good.
I'm like, I know, but like, I just can't. I was like, and then anyway, so I just kind of went into this full internal mode. And then I remember asking my doula, I was like, so how close do you think like, how far away am I? Like, I can't be in this for much longer. And she was just like, she would never tell me, like, I was pretty much at this point, like Nelly crowning. And she was just like, you're just doing so great. Like, she would never have said like, you know, you're this close or the head's out, like, you know, whatever. But then as I sort of said that, I was like starting to feel the urge of like, okay, I think I'm gonna have to start pushing here. I think I can feel a head. And it just was like, so this is like now, what are we time-wise? Like, this is probably only about 9:15. And I was like, so yeah, this labor literally was from about like intensified from 7 till about 9. That was when it was kind of at its full peak.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, no, I feel ahead, like I'm feeling the urge to push. And then this time around, like I really wanted to try and make sure that I was in a position where I'd have the best pelvic outlet and enough space that baby could come through. So knowing that I wasn't going to get in the pool, I was still on all fours. So that was a good birthing position. And I remember like I started to feel the urge to push, but from what I'd learned and, you know, how amazing our body is that we actually have like the fetal ejection reflex. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm just going to try and trust and see if I can, you know, experience that and not try and push this baby and try and, you know, potentially avoid having a tear. So, you know, it was this really weird sensation because that was kind of my plan leading into it. But then I just had this biggest urge that I was like, you know, it's like that I need to poo, like I've got to push kind of thing. And I was like, just that pressure that you have. And so I was like, right, okay, so I'm just going to listen to that. And so I just started like gently pushing. And then straight away, I just felt like the head like come down the birth canal and kind of like pop in, pop out. And I was like, okay, shit, like this is happening. Like this is so quick. And I was like, okay, that's a head. So I was kind of like, right. I was kind of a bit shocked really because it was just so intense and obviously for good reason because it was, you know, it was showtime. And then so that was like one contraction. And then the next contraction, you know, it came to a full crown and like baby's head was like fully out. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'm on all fours and I was like, obviously I'm not going to get this water birth that I thought. My mum comes in and the doula's like, it's crowning. And mum's like, what do you mean? And she's like, my mum, bless her, this was like, it just made, but now looking back on it and when I looked at the videos, my mum is like, okay, so she's still like trying to get the pool warm enough for me at this point. And so she comes in with a saucepan and like Rosie's like, she's crowning. And mum's like, okay, so what do I do with the saucepan? And she's like, just put it in the pool, just dump that and come here. And then mum goes, okay, so she's going to like get in the water now as I'm like literally crowning a baby. It was just like, it was the funniest thing. And I was just thinking, I was like, could you imagine like trying to transfer as you've got a crowning baby into the water? Anyways, so Rosie was just like, no, she's staying here. It's happening now. And so mum was like, okay, righto. And then, so I've like reached back and I put my hand on baby's head. So I'm on all fours. Yeah. Like on one hand, the other hand I've reached through, felt the head like fully out. And I was like, okay, wow, this is like a baby. And I'm starting to get excited. I'm like, oh my God, my baby. Like, and then it kind of was at the point where I was like, okay, I just need to slow this down and I'm just going to not push and just let my body just open and do its thing. And then next contraction comes pretty quickly. And I'm talking like within, you know, full crown in one contraction and about 30 seconds later, the next contraction comes. I didn't even push and she just slides on out. And I was like, okay, that was the fetal ejection reflex. Like I didn't have to do anything. And so I literally just had my hand on her head and I was quite low, like I was on my elbows, well, one hand on my elbow, and then I've just like guided her down. We were on like a nice little cushiony mat. And so, yeah, I kind of guided her down to the floor. And then I was kind of just in shock. And I was like, oh my God, like the baby just slipped out. Like it's crazy. And so then I've like reached down and like picked her up. And it was just like, I'm so grateful that I got these birth photos because if you see this look of like bliss and excitement and shock on my face, it's just like the most special photo. Yeah, it was just kind of like this surreal moment of like, oh my God, I just did this. It was so primal. Like I literally just let my body take over. It happened so quickly. I just got out of my head, didn't think of anything and just let my body do what it naturally wanted to do. And it just, this baby just slid out. And I was like so shocked. And then because I was expecting like, I'd read a lot of research around like as babies in birth canal, like you should try and slow it down to help like let your body stretch and open more to avoid any tears. And I was like, oh my God, like she came out so fast. Surely I've torn. And I didn't. And it was amazing. But it was just like, And then, because I'd read about the fetal ejection reflex, and I was like, oh my God, how amazing would that be to experiencing that? And yeah, like looking at that video, she literally just, it's just, I can't even explain it to you. It's just amazing how your body can do that. Wow. And anyways, yeah, so I've had this baby, and then I pick her up. And because, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was another thing that kind of, as we sort of touched on before about like how we are mammals when we birth. If you ever have watched like say a horse or again, this is kind of a bit weird, but like a horse or a cow, when they birth, like the baby literally falls out, and as they fall out, it actually helps them kind of rouse, and having that fall to the ground is actually really good to help them get into their body and like start breathing, and
as well.
And so I kind of read into a little bit about how mammals do that and how that's a thing that helps them. And then so intuitively, like I didn't even like, she kind of just came out that quick that she just kind of did kind of like, obviously I had my hand on her head and like guided her gently, but she just like immediately roused, like she was there and she was crying, and I was like, oh my God, like. And then she was a little bit mucousy because obviously she didn't have enough time in the birth canal to really fully squeeze out some of that mucus. So I just sort of like picked her up. She was crying, but I could sort of hear she was a little bit mucousy. So I just like laid her on my arm, like face down, and just kind of rubbed her back. And then within like 30 seconds to a minute, she like, had turned fully pink. She was breathing. She was doing all the things. And then she just like had this massive clear out of all the fluid and mucus. And then, it was just like this screaming baby. And at this point, like we didn't even know like what we were having either. So it was a surprise. So I was like, is it a boy? Is it a girl? And Jake was kind of like, he looked initially as she first sort of came out, and he was like, it's a boy. And I was like, and he goes, I think. And I was like, what do you mean you think? And he was just like, well, I think so. And like, we were just sort of like, making sure she was okay, going through that motion. I'm just in this ecstatic bliss that I've got a baby. I didn't really care what it was. And, didn't really have time to kind of take it all in. I was just kind of like, oh my God, like in this shock of like, and it was this weirdest experience. Like it was so blissful. I was so excited. I was ecstatic. But then at the same time, I was shocked. And I was like, this just happened so quickly. This was amazing. Like, I feel amazing. Like, oh my God, like I did it. And then, like we obviously, as things sort of settled down post that, and we just had each other like skin to skin and did the breast crawl and all that sort of stuff. And then I was kind of like, Jake's like, so what is it? And then we finally had a proper look, and the poor thing, like her labia was really swollen. So they did look like two little testes. And then when we actually had a good look, I was like, no, it's a girl. And then, like, cause I remember with Charlie, he actually had really swollen testes as well. And so I kind of, that's, I guess, where we kind of thought, oh yeah, it's a boy. But so it was this just surreal moment of like, okay, I've just done this, I birthed this baby, like it happened so quickly, like literally. So I had her at 9:28 p.m. the doula got there at 8:15 and she wasn't waiting for anyone. Like she made us wait that extra week, but when it came to later time, she was ready to come.
That's insane. So you had like your first contraction at like about 4-5-ish, and then by about, like 4 hours later, and then 4 hours later she's born.
And those first 2 hours, I mean, like I was literally still holding conversations, walking around, like playing with Charlie, like it was not even, I wouldn't even really consider those first 2 hours like labor. It was like it just got to that real intense like point at 7 o'clock, between 7 and like 9, and to the time that I had her, like that was the intense point. But it was just like so crazy, and I was just like, wow, so birth can be like this. Like it can be quick, it can be ecstatic, it can be blissful. Like obviously, you still go through the motions, and it obviously it hurts, but you can kind of just it was this weird thing. Like I kind of said to, now I've had time to like process it and rewatch the videos, look at the photos and that sort of thing. It was almost like when I was in that moment, like your soul like kind of leaves your body, and I was like, I was watching down on myself, if that makes sense. Like and I've heard this like women speak of this as well, is it's like you're kind of like remote viewing yourself of like your body just you kind of get out of your own way. Your body knows what it's doing. I was just in full surrender to like whatever it needed. I just listened and just went with that. And like she came out, she was so healthy. Then placenta came out about an hour after. She did the breast crawl, and she's just been the most settlest, like amazing baby I could have ever asked for. She just sleeps, wants to be held, is cuddled all the time. Like it's just it's, and I think that has a lot to do with how she was kind of brought into this world too. Like it was just so intuitive and so meant to be that we didn't have any kind of like stress, or, you know, she didn't pick up on any of that stress. Like never in that whole point in time, obviously it went very fast, did I ever doubt myself? Did I ever think there was something feeling wrong? Yeah, it just came back to this full trust and surrender, and it was just amazing.
Wow. And see, that's like, that is such an amazing story. And obviously a super fast labor. Like, I mean, that could have been an example of you going, oh, you know, if you were to birth in a hospital for that birth, where you would have gone, oh, I'll stay at home for as long as possible. You would have had her at home anyway. You know?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, like, because where we were now living on the Sunshine Coast, the hospital was like 20 minutes away. So yeah, no doubt. It could have gone either way. Like it could have potentially stalled, you know, I probably would have progressed really well at home. And then as I maybe tried to transfer, it could have stalled things. I don't know, but
that's right.
Yeah.
But it's an absolute prime example of obviously the ability we have to birth. But, you know, obviously disability is in us, but we need the confidence. We just need to have the mind there. Otherwise, you know, that's not going to work, because if your head is saying you can't do it, then your body's not going to do it, you know. You need to have the two align, and that's exactly what you had. Obviously you prepped yourself so well, you know, physically, mentally, and, you know, spiritually, to go, I can do it. There's no reason, there's nothing stopping me, and then there was nothing stopping you. Not even a pool not being ready. There you go. And you just, as you said, you know, we're mammals. Like, you know, yes, we do, you know, just like mammals, you know, some position like being on all fours, that's exactly the position most animals would birth in, if not laying down as well. We know that, for example, giraffe, they fall from 2 meters.
Quite a height. Like you kind of think, like, is this baby giraffe going to survive that drop? But that's literally like what rouses them into their body, and then they just kind of get up and start trotting around.
And as you said with the for example, in the example of the giraffe, it's when they hit the ground, again, it's a compression of their lungs to get mucus out as well, so that it's that squeeze, you know, like Daisy didn't have it, but you did it, you know, afterwards. That's the same, that's hitting the ground, mucus out, so then they can kind of go, whoa, okay, this had just happened. I'm out. It's amazing the way you were just in your head, in your space. You know, you didn't let, obviously the pool not being ready could have been a huge thing, obviously, when you've got you know, you've got the intention to birth in the pool, and that's, you know, obviously we know that's a great place to birth, and when that's not ready, it could be, you know, we know that in labor, when things don't go according to plan, it becomes a huge thing, obviously, and you go, oh no, I can't do it anymore. And you just went, okay, no, I can, and I'll stay in this position and I'll just do it. And it's amazing. What an amazing birth story. Wow. I love it.
So it's just like, I guess that's the other thing, is that I want to, I guess, like sharing this story, and even from like knowing with what I know now and the experiences that I've gone through, but had I have known this, you know, innate wisdom that is within us for my first birth with Charlie, like, I just want to let women know, like, I didn't even know that was a thing, like what the fetal ejection reflex was, like that your body, and I even read somewhere that even if you're unconscious, so say if I lost consciousness, my body would still know how to push that baby out, like without me being consciously aware of it. Like, isn't that just crazy to think that we as women have that ability and that gift? But yet, for some reason, somewhere along the way, we've either lost that wisdom or knowing on how to trust ourselves. Like, how has that happened? And then everything becomes systemized, and, you know, you're fitting into a box, and everyone's expected to fit into that box and present, you know, birth and pregnancy and labor to be within that box. And we know that that's not the case. Like, it can be, you know, it's just amazing that I wish more women would know that. So women, listen to this, trust yourselves. You got this.
Exactly. And trust yourself in any settings. You know, it doesn't have to be a free birth. It
even
doesn't have to be a home birth.
Like,
exactly.
It's amazing. And like, you know, throughout the journey, even just like, you know, things with sicknesses and trusting, like I remember there was one point Charlie was about 10 months old, and he was having this really bad period where he was quite sick. Like he had this, you know, he was at daycare and he'd had this like cough, and he was chesty for like, I feel like it was like 2 months. And so, you know, I'd been to numerous doctors, and I kid you not, I went to 3 different doctors in 1 week, right? And the first doctor told me, okay, your son has asthma and he has eczema. Here's a prescription for Ventolin. Here's a prescription for a steroid cream for the eczema. So I was like, pretty sure that's not the case. You know, I just sort of was like, that's pretty far-fetched. Like, he's not that bad. And then I went and got a second opinion. And then the other doctor was like, oh, no, it's just an ear and a throat infection. Here's some antibiotics. And then I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I could see that. But at the same time, I was like, you know, I didn't want to give him antibiotics if it wasn't, you know, really necessary. And I was like, how about we test to see, like, if it's viral, if it's bacterial? Because, you know, I knew that, you know, antibiotics works obviously for bacterial infections, but if it's viral, then it really doesn't do anything apart from, you know, infiltrate the immune system. And so I went to this third doctor and he was the only one who was like, okay, well, why don't I run some tests? So he's like, you know, this swab's not very nice, but, you know, we'll swab his, like, so he did like a nasal swab similar to, I think it's the same sort of thing that they use for the COVID swabs. And that's so what he did there. He's like, I'm just going to warn you, this is not nice. You know, it's, you know, you don't have to look or whatever. And I was like, okay, thank you. Like, he was beautiful doctor. And he was like, yep, so we'll test it and we'll see. And so this was like a Friday. And by this point, he'd actually regressed quite a bit and had this really high fever. And I was like, oh, what do I do? And he was just like, look, I'll write you a script for antibiotics. He's like, this was be, regardless of what the result is, this would be like my standard practice. And I was like, okay. So I took the script and it was the weekend. I was like, do I feel it? Do I not feel it? And for some reason, I just had this thing. It was like, no, it's okay. We can ride this out. Like, he's okay. You know, he was still breastfeeding at the time. He was really well hydrated. Everything was fine. And then, so I rode out the weekend. We got the test results on Monday and it was a viral infection. So I was like, it was just turned out there was just this viral infection. It just kind of lingered on for a little bit and it was just his body, you know, fully getting it out of his system. And he managed to get it, you know, on top of it with, you know, me feeding him breast milk. And I think I was doing a couple of other things, like trying to give him a little bit of vitamin C or probiotics or whatever it was. But I was like, literally 3 different opinions from 3 different doctors turned out to be 3 different things, none of which were correct. And I was like, but intuitively, I knew that he was fine all along and that, you know, we would get over and get through it. So it just comes back to things like that. So not only do you need that intuition in birth, but then, when it comes to, when your little one is sick or if something doesn't feel right or you know, you think things are okay. And if someone's telling you that it's not, like, you know, always trust that. That's one thing I've learned. And it's, I don't know why we as women have lost that ability to trust ourselves and be confident in that. It's,
it is absolutely everything to have intuition, but to listen to it, because obviously you can have your intuition and then kind of go, oh no, the doctor knows best. Not the case all the time.
No.
It's, again, society. I don't know when we lost that touch with intuition where we went, oh no, I have to trust someone else who barely knows my child. You know,
and I mean, like, that's that could go down a whole other conversation too. But it's just I something that we as women need to take that power and intuition back for sure.
And so I guess to finish off, let's touch on what you did differently for your postpartum with Daisy. What themes did you implement?
So obviously it was right around that Christmas period. So we weren't quite sure. Had I had her before Christmas, we knew that like Christmas was just going to be at home. I wasn't going to have any visitors. Like only my real like immediate family, like my mum and dad, and I did have like a couple of my aunties who I was quite close with who would have just come for like a day visit or like, you know, an hour or whatever it might have been. So I obviously Christmas didn't happen like with babies, so that was fine. And then after that, I was like, okay, I really don't want to have any visitors. Like no one's going to stay with us. It's just going to be Jake, me, Charlie, and baby. But I'm happy to have like people drop in. So like mum dropped in, and then a couple of my aunties like the day after just to kind of see me, see Barb, and they were only there for like half an hour max. And I was kind of like, no, that's like enough. And I was basically, this time I literally stayed in bed for like 2 weeks. Like I was doing a lot of research around like the traditional Chinese medicine practices and trying to follow a lot of that sort of stuff. And that is pretty much strict bed rest. Like that's pretty intense. I think it says for like 40 days. I was like, I can't probably do that long, but I'll do it as long as I can. And then so if people would come, I would literally just stay in bed. Like I didn't feel like I had that pressure to kind of come out and greet them and, you know, do all that. I was kind of like, I'm just going to do this. Like if you want to come see me and baby, like we're in bed, we're feeding, you know, you may get to hold her, you may not. Like it was just kind of, I guess I had those kind of firm boundaries.
Good.
And then Yeah, so that was pretty much, although within that first 2 weeks, the one thing we did have to go and do just for registering Daisy's birth was go and see our GP. To make sure, like, because I saw her towards the back end of my pregnancy to say, like, yes, I'm carrying this baby. Yes, this child is mine. Because obviously not having it gone through the health system, you have to have those things in order to register the birth. So then we had to go to the doctor to make sure, like, yep, she's witnessed that I was pregnant and now I've had this child, to sign on, write a letter to send off to register her birth. So that was in the first, I think that was like a week after. So that was like our first kind of mini outing. And then, didn't really do anything, came back home, went back, laid in bed as much as I could. And then it wasn't until after 2 weeks that I kind of started to emerge out and do a little bit more. And it just happened to be that it was my dad's 60th birthday 2 weeks after that she was born. So that was like our first major outing, but she was amazing. Like, she was happy to be held and cuddled and do all that sort of thing. But, you know, people were really respectful of everything, and that was nice. And then we just sort of slowly started to, you know, venture out a little bit more as we needed to. And obviously it was different too, because having Charlie, it was hard to try and keep him entertained, but it was good that, you know, Jake and him really got to connect and bond more as I was with Daisy, and my time was kind of consumed by her early on, that they got that time together. But in saying that, then Charlie was starting school. So like 4 weeks postpartum was when school was starting. So I had to do this pickups and drop-offs. And so that was kind of intensive. But I was amazed at how much energy I had. Like, I did placenta encapsulation with Daisy, and that was just phenomenal. Like, I had so much energy. By week 4, I was like, I'm great. Like, I feel amazing. Like, I'd never had any sleep deprivation. I still don't. Like, even though she's still up a few times through the night, like, I never got to the point of sleep deprivation. You know, we kind of were co-sleeping at the time. Well, we still kind of do. She's still in a cot in our bed, but then most times ends up in my bed. But she was, we kind of had to be ready for that routine, and she's just kind of slotted into that. And it was a completely different experience. And even in terms of exercise this time around, like, I've just been so slow and really gentle. And, you know, I haven't really delved into, I've done a little bit of Pilates, a little bit of yoga, and I haven't even thought about, you know, going back into some strength training just yet, but just focusing more on, just restoring core and pelvic floor sort of function, knowing what I know now. And it's been very different, much more chill. Even considering I had a 6-year-old this time around.
No, that's that's good. And as you said, you know, the fact that you had Charlie, you know, 6 years ago, he goes to school, so therefore through the day, well, you're just a mom to one, basically. And then, you know, you pick him up, and then now you've got 2 children, but at least you get 6 or 7 hours of solid just, you know, me and Daisy time, and then Charlie comes back, and then, you know, you've bonded with Daisy, and then you get to, obviously, you know, Charlie gets to play with Daisy, and then you get to bond with him as well. It works really well, that having that 6-year age gap for that. Wow. That's amazing. And as you said, you know, this time around, just taking it slow, doing things on your own terms.
And because I guess that's the other thing, I didn't appreciate how quickly the newborn phase goes. And so with Daisy, I've been kind of like really just savoring it, and been like, you know, just every cuddle I can get. I'm like, you're not going to be this little forever. Like, it just happened so fast. Before I know it, you're going to be 6 years old. Like, so just really trying to slow everything down. It was completely different postpartum experience.
That is so amazing, and so good that you can kind of go, this was my experience with Charlie, and then I've learned from it, and I've decided to do things this way now for those reasons. So that, as you said, at 4 weeks postpartum, you're like bursting out with energy. Like,
it's amazing.
Bring it on. Wow, absolutely amazing. That is so inspiring. You know, your whole, you know, everything you've said like today is so inspiring. There's so many good messages for women, for first-time moms, for, you know, second, third-time moms. It's amazing. That is so good. Thank you so much for, you know, for having told your story, for coming on the podcast. It's, I've loved every second of it. It's been so good.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share, and hopefully this will inspire other women. And that's, I hope so. I guess my main importance that I want to kind of get across is, we can do it. I'm not special. You and I, we're the same. We're women. We can all do it.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.